questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And let's begin. So today, obviously, the orientation is for the Local History Special Collections branch of the Alexandria Library. Pre-pandemic, the photo you see is how our reading room looked at that time. Currently, we've lost a few tables and obviously a lot more chairs for social distancing purposes. Okay, now in terms of what to expect during the orientation today, we're going to discuss our location, what types of materials we hold in the local history branch. We'll look at our website and give some tips on navigating it. We'll also look at basically a tour of the space, as well as some subject-specific books and publications and such that are generally pertinent to most of our users. And we'll also look at some online resources that are useful, that are not necessarily restricted to on-site use at the library. And then at the end, if you have any questions, we can look at those. Okay, so in terms of location, we are co-located with the Barrett Library at 717 Queen Street. And so it is in Old Town Alexandria. I've put an image of the map here. So if you're aware of where Christ Church is, for example, that's down in this location. And Office of Historic Alexandria, the Lloyd House is right here. So we're right in the midst of Old Town. In terms of planning your visit, if you want it to come on site, please be aware that there is no parking lot for the library. So it's all on-street parking. And in the vicinity of the library, it's generally 2 to 3 hour parking depending on which block you're on. Directly in front of the library on Queen Street, there's some short-term parking. We do recommend people not use that if they're coming to our branch, just because generally if you're coming to local history, you're going to need more than 15-20 minutes. So be aware of that. In terms of our response to the pandemic, we have been providing reference assistance as needed through Zoom appointments, email. We have some forms available that allow people to email us their questions. So we've tried to be adaptable and available through a variety of means since people can't come on site. We are open at about 25% capacity right now, so we are still very much by appointment. Our reading room can only have 5 people total in it at a time, so that pretty much restricts us to about 3 individuals coming in to do research, because we try to keep 2 staff members on site at all time. And so oftentimes we'll need to be moving in and out of the space. However, if we have a high demand, then we just know that whoever that second person is going to have to be very careful before entering the space and make sure that we're not going over the amount of people we can have. As I said before, we are co-located with the Barrett Library. A lot of times that makes people confused. Just understand that administratively we are very much separate entities within the library system, and that affects hours that we're available. Our staff is different. Our staff can have some slightly different qualifications to the qualifications needed to work at some of the other branches. So there's some distinctions that go on behind the scenes that people aren't necessarily aware of, but the key area it impacts the public is pay attention to the hours. You cannot look at Barrett's website for the hours for local history. If you try to come at a time when local history is not open, we're just not available. And people get confused about that because they're in Barrett. They think they should be able to get into local history, but it's often not the case. Okay, in terms of reference assistance, As I said, on-site by appointment, email. We also help people by telephone if it's a short inquiry. If it is a complicated inquiry, we're going to refer you to our website forms for you to submit a request through that, and then we'll do a virtual reference interview with you to help figure out exactly what you need, what type of research strategy you need to have to know how to go about finding the answer that you need. In terms of our forms, I have a link here. And so where you would find these is basically when you get on the library's website, at the top, look at locations, you would select local history, and that takes you to this page. And as you scroll down this page, which is our branch landing page, you can see here on the right-hand side, we have a genealogy research request form, a house history research request form, and then a general research request. And fairly recently, we have added an online shop here. Just a plug there if you're interested in looking at what books we have or prints we have available for sale. You can purchase them there and we'll get them mailed out to you. Okay, so in terms of resources that we have, what subject areas we cover in local history, we basically cover Virginia and Alexandria history, hence local history. Virginia, we look at genealogy by counties. So when you were able to browse our stacks before, you would see these groupings of counties, and it would have everything pertinent to Fairfax in one group of shelves. And that would cover everything from the local history to the genealogy. So you'd have these little mini sections where Dewey can run from the 300s all the way up to 975 for history within this one group of shelves because they are grouped by county. So that's something to be aware of when you come in to use our materials. If you come in with just strictly the call number, you're going to find that we're going to ask you, okay, are you looking at a county? Are you looking at general Virginia history? Because that tells us, okay, do we take you to the broader state history section, or do we have to show you how to navigate through the county section? In terms of biographies, those are also separated out. So those are not actually under a Dewey call number. Really, they are in their own section of the stacks, biographies, surname of the individual. So we have a lot of presidential papers there, and we also have biographies on local Alexandrians as well as important people from Virginia history. Local newspapers, Alexandria Gazette, we have that on microfilm. In terms of regional newspapers, the Washington Post Historical Newspaper Database is a subscription database we have that's available on the library's database page. And a thing to know in regards to newspapers is there are some major digitization projects that have been going on for probably about 2 decades now, both at the Library of Congress, that one's called Chronicling America, and also at the Library of Virginia, and that one's called Virginia Chronicle. And so those sites take care of providing access to newspapers which are in the public domain. Now, they don't have the full public domain covered because they do have to get grants to digitize different blocks of newspapers. So just be aware of that when you're looking for newspapers, that's a good site for anything pre-1923, 24 at this point. We also do have maps and blueprints, especially for the local area. The maps that have the highest usage are obviously our Alexandria maps, usually either city agencies, employees looking at the maps, or individuals interested in house histories and such like that. Okay, so in terms of secondary sources, our card catalog, you can tell I grew up on card catalogs. Our online catalog is located, and you can, you can get to it off of the main library page. And you can see here This drop down says everything, which is, you can leave it as that. If you know you just want to search the library catalog, or if you just want to search digital catalogs, so for ebooks or something like that, you can do that. Typically, I just leave it to everything and all fields. You can then search, let's see, let's just see what we have on Queen Street. And so this shows you the results where there's the term Queen Street or Queen and Street in the library catalog. If you're looking for local history materials specifically, then you want to come down and look at these filters or facets coming down the left-hand side of the screen. And so at the very top, you can select which branch you are looking for materials at. In this instance, you can either click the checkbox and click include, or you can just click local history, and that's going to filter it down to just the materials that are local history. And as you can see, there's additional formats, author, different ways you can narrow down further. So sometimes you might get a list of 500 books, and you can use these tools to narrow down closer and closer to what you want. So if you know you want something that's published more recently, you can use the publication date to search for those types of materials. If you're looking for an older, rarer book to see, you know, what was the societal attitudes at a certain time, then you can look for something that's, say, pre-1970. In addition, you can narrow by subject, language, and you also can see down here shelf location. So you can see whether it's a biography, a fiction, or a nonfiction. It often surprises people that we have this little group of fiction. This is a very small group of materials that was basically local authors at one point. It's not a group we add to anymore, but that's what it is. It's in our rare book room because it is local authors. So, okay. Now, in terms of subject guides, you can navigate to subject guides that are specific to local history. And so if you were to look on our page here, on our landing page, you can see we have some of them listed. African Americans, buildings and land, genealogy, military. These are specific areas we know that people generally need a little bit more guidance in. And so these guides are available. They will show you, as you can see from this one on African American resources, what guides and indexes are available at our location. You can also come down and see general reference books that you can use, as well as genealogy specific books. In terms of, with this being African American resources, the genealogy is a bit more complicated than it is for other groups. So letting people know what resources are available to help guide them through that process of locating their ancestors. In addition, you can see here we also have microfilm available and some electronic resources. In this instance, this is on CD-ROM. And then it also covers specifically Alexandria resources related to African American history, and then Virginia resources related to African American history. And you can continue down, and then you have a listing of the manuscript materials, which may have pertinent material. In addition, vertical files, these are the terms in our vertical files. We often start people with the vertical file collection. These are usually newspaper clippings, brochures, just sort of random material that aren't really archival, but also aren't necessarily published, or in the case of newspaper clippings, you know, they're just being grouped by subject to make them more accessible. In terms of inventories, so when you hear us say inventories or finding aids, we are referring specifically to guides, basically to our archival materials. So manuscript collections. Sorry, the question just popped up in the chat. Are the subject guides just online, or are they available to download and browse offline as well? You can print out the web page. I have been wanting to look at them and revise them a bit and put them up as PDFs because I think that would be useful for people, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so in terms of the archival materials and manuscript collections, we have a software database specifically designed for manuscript finding aids. And this is the page you would come to. And it allows you to do some searching. So understand that when you're looking at archival and manuscript collections, in a lot of ways, researching in them is just not going to be as easy as researching in a publication. So a lot of that has to do with the level of indexing we can afford to do with collections. It's very difficult to index all the names, all the dates, all the subjects in, 5 boxes of paper. So we make a stab at it, though. We do some groupings and encourage people to investigate. So in terms of using this search, it defaults to search all record types. I recommend that people change that to limit to collections, because what that's going to do is when you search, and you do want to put this in quotes, Queen Street, you limit it to collections, then you're going to get fewer results, but it's going to tell you which actual archival collections have the term Queen Street in that guide. So you can see we got a fair bit because, historically, Old Town, Queen Street, a lot going on there. You can see, for example, James F. Carlin and Son hardware records. If you thought, well, maybe that's something I want to look at. If you come to us asking for this collection, we're going to need to know this MS 112 number, because that's the collection number, and the collection name. And if possible, if you come in and look at collection organization, you can begin to see how this collection breaks down. And so you can see this collection has an account book for 1864 to 1866, another one for 1868 to 69, and then letters and correspondence. So a typical request we might get from someone who is out of state is, why can't you just send me copies of all of this? Well, it's one full box of material, so we simply don't have the staff to make photocopies at that level and send them off. But if you come on site, we'd be more than happy to pull each item for you to look at. And you can then examine it and decide if it has pertinent information or not. Okay, so that is how you search our archival finding aids. In terms of our vertical files that you heard me mention before, where we usually start people, you can find a guide online on our website, and it might take it a minute to load. This is a PDF, and this lists all the subjects within our vertical collection, vertical file collection. So you can see we have Abington, African Americans, and then it's subdivided. Airports, Alexandria Academy. It goes down. We have some biographies. A lot of the usage for this particular group of materials is where you come down to, let me see if I can get to it. It's the historic properties group. And so you can see that starts here, and Alfred Street all the way through Old Town. And so a lot of times people will come in and say they have a house in the 600 block of Cameron Street. We'll pull that folder for them to start with. One of our pandemic projects, if you will, has been to go through these historic property folders and begin to actually indicate on the outside of the folder which addresses we know are in that folder. And that further helps people so they don't have to go through the entire folder if their address isn't actually in there. And it also helps us to provide better service to them, because when they give us an address from the start, we can look at the folder and say, okay, this isn't going to help them because there's nothing in this folder. Whereas before it was just 600 block. You may have something, you may not. You're going to have to look through it and see. So we've been happy to do that because it just gives us a little bit more ability to assist and streamline the process. In terms of making copies and scans, we do have a photocopier on site, 25 cents. We can reproduce images for you, but we do ask that you comply with copyright. So if you just want a picture of your house from a certain time period and we have that available, $20 to scan it. You can take it to Walmart or wherever, get a print made, hang it on your wall, that's fine. If you need to publish it, that's where we need to work more with you to figure out, is it in the public domain? If it's not in the public domain, so if it's from a time period after 1923 and 24, then we start looking at, okay, can we identify the photographer? Do we have rights to give you permission to publish it in a book or anything like that? Because we might not, and we might not be able to identify a photographer. It depends on how the materials came to us. But we do ask that people make a good faith effort to comply with copyright. And let me check the chat here. In terms of the biographies mentioned before, yes, they are categorized by the person's last name. So, you know, Washington comes at the end. Kate Waller Barrett is near the start of the section. So it's an easier way to handle biographies, just by the nature of people come in with that surname, and we can just take them right to the biographies and say, okay, this is what we have. Now, if we were a larger library, that probably wouldn't work as well. So right now, with the size that we are, that's an adequate method of handling biographies. Okay, so in looking around the space, if you come on site for an appointment, these are some of the books that we would have you use depending on the type of research. So if you're looking at genealogy, we do have the Virginia Genealogist that can help you locate sources on surnames that might not be readily available otherwise, as well as giving you leads on just, you know, what's going on in the state of Virginia with that family. In terms of William and Mary Quarterly, this is an excellent resource for Virginia history. Also, Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, as well as the Journal of Southern History, are all relevant resources. And one of the things to be aware of with these is that these last three especially are also available in the Jstor database, which is a subscription database you can access from off of our database page for the library. Okay, and the last item showing here is National Genealogical Society Quarterly. So that obviously takes a national scope, as it indicates in the title, but again, it can help you figure out, you know, surname seems to disappear here in Virginia. Is there another place I can pick it up? Just tips like that, which this can be useful for. Okay. In terms of microfilm, microfiche, so all the micro formats, we do have city directories for other locations on microfiche. These are steadily becoming more available through Ancestry, but for now we've hung on to these until we can thoroughly check what's available online and what's not. But if you know that somebody moved from Virginia to Pennsylvania, which is not at all unusual for that type of travel up and down the East Coast, you can look and see if you can pick them up in some of these directories. In terms of microfilm, which is available, you can see here, this is one of the many drawers we have on the Alexandria Gazette. We have the Gazette from 1794 to 2008. So that's all on microfilm. We do encourage people to come in and, if possible, do their own research in microfilm. Oftentimes people request obituaries from us. We have an obituary index which is available for certain years, but it hasn't been brought up all the way to the 2008 time period. And that's in part because in the 1990s, you start to see obituaries in newspapers begin to taper off. So oftentimes when we get requests for the 1990s and the 2000s, we know we're not as likely to find something. And in those cases, you'll want to start looking at local funeral homes, and if they have web pages available which might show information. The Draper manuscripts, this is a collection that many archival repositories have on microfilm. It's an important group of materials. There is a published guide to it. So it can be useful for colonial era history. You can also see here we have Society of Friends records. We have microfilm of Arlington County records, which, if you know anything about the history of Alexandria, the retrocession aspect, when Alexandria became an independent city, you know that there's a lot of overlap with Arlington. So it's always useful to have those records, because sometimes it's going to be difficult to know whether it's going to be under Alexandria or it's going to be under Arlington, and you need to be prepared to go either direction to find the information you need, especially if you're looking at property records or where people were living at certain times. Okay, and then down in this example, this shows the deed books. And we do get a lot of use of these deed books. There are indexes at the very start of this series that you would have to use first in order to figure out which one of these reels to use. So know that that can be an arduous process, but once you figure out the information in these, it can unlock other resources for you. Okay, so the vertical file collection that I've mentioned before is stored in these lateral file cabinets. And so these are right at the reference desk, easy for people to access. We have been working on condensing these a bit so that they will fit entirely in these two file cabinets, because as you can see up here, we have several boxes that are also stashed on top. But we've been deduplicating material. So in some instances, we've found where people just, oh, this news clipping needs to be in this file, and they didn't check the file before adding the clipping. So there have been instances where we have removed 5 copies of the same clippings from these folders, and that's allowing us to save some space. And it also saves us from paper cuts. So much appreciated to have the opportunity to do that project. And then this shows our map cases with our Alexandria maps dating back from 1760 all the way up to not quite current, but close. And these are used quite a bit, like I said, by city staff researching various aspects of where things were at different times, whether it's what the shoreline looked like at different periods, things like that. This is an example of some of our archival materials. So you can see our standard archival box here, which houses legal size documents, legal and regular size documents. You can see some ledgers down here on the side where they're lined flat and they're bound a little differently and housed differently. And then this shows the photo index. And so these are now available on our website. So if you were to come to our, our landing page here and go to plan your visit, you can come down and you see this Alexandria Library Photo Index. If you click on that, it's going to download an Excel file here in the corner. And once that downloads, you can open that and you can actually go through this and you can sort by subject. So if you know you're looking at King Street, you can come and click this little button here, search King Street, hit enter. That gives you all of the sections of the index that have King Street relevant materials. And then what you can come over and do is you click on this link and it's going to download a second file, a PDF in this instance. And when you get there, what you have basically are photocopies of the images in our collections. Now, it's not every single collection because at a certain point we stopped adding to this. But it gives you an idea of what generally the pictures look like, whether you want to look at the original, whether you want a copy of the original, etc. So that's how you can look at that now. So you don't actually have to come on site for the photo index anymore. And we really looked at doing that because with the pandemic going on, we were doing a lot of research in these and a lot of back and forth with individuals. So getting these out there to where people can look for themselves and then come to us and say, yeah, I want this item, has been a lifesaver in terms of how much time we have to spend on each request. And given that we really have only had 2 people on site for the entirety of the pandemic, it's been necessary to manage time more efficiently. Okay. Some more space around the room. So this top picture here is of our Alexandria materials. So front and back of this bookcase is all Alexandria. On the left-hand side here are our ready reference materials. So these are the things which are most often used. So tombstone inscriptions, obituary indexes, who's who in Alexandria from, the early part of the 17th, 18th centuries. Also some information on the Alexandria census, as well as plats and such like that are in this group. As you come down towards the middle here, you have more information that's on like specific Alexandria churches. And it runs from here in Dewey. So, like I said, churches, you go into the 700s, you end up in the 900s, and you have some of the 929 materials here, which tend to be genealogical in nature. And as you come around the back side, you'll end up with materials such as archaeological reports and general history of Alexandria. So Seaport Saga and books like that will be on this other side. And then this last corner on the opposite side are all the city directories. And people often forget, but city directories are very, very useful in terms of locating where a person lived. If they are ones that cross-reference where you can look up the address and see who the person is, as well as look up the person and see where they live, those are the most useful, but not all of them are like that. However, they're still an excellent resource for tracking people down. And this is a selection, the roster of Confederate soldiers. So there is a small group of materials on their own shelf in one of the back corners. We've nicknamed it Confederate Corner. And it's basically these volumes of resources that are needed by military historians and individuals who have ancestors who were Confederate soldiers. So these are just materials that allow people to track an individual or track regiments and such in Virginia during those time periods. We also have the Virginia Slave Birth Index here, and that's also a very popular resource. It you would look at it by county, surname, and then individual name. And of course, the surname would be the plantation owner's surname. But it can be very helpful for people to figure out, okay, we know our ancestors came from this county. What might be the surnames we need to be looking under? Like I said, this is a very difficult area to piece things together in, just because of how records were managed and, you know, just what was occurring at that time. So like I said, excellent resource for people and much used. And then this is an image of the city directories that I'd mentioned on the image before. So you can see we have a fair amount here. The shelves above, we have some directories that go back much earlier. Obviously different formats and such. So what type of information you can find. Sometimes they're just business directories. So you're literally, you know, hoping that whoever told you that your ancestor was a baker was correct, and you can look under bakeries and see who was working in Alexandria at specific time periods. Okay. Now, in terms of online resources, you've heard me mention a few times our database page. So if we were to go all the way up to services, you would then come down and over to the right under research services, you see a link for databases. And if you click there, this takes you to the database page. I tend to leave it in A to Z, but you can look at them by category. One reason I tend to leave it in A to Z is because I can find Jstor easier, and that tends to be a resource we use a lot in this branch. And as you come down, let me take you back to the presentation. This discusses which subscription databases tend to be most useful for the people who come to our branch. So Ancestry, Fold 3, Washington Post historical newspapers, U.S. History Collection, World History, and Jstor. Of those, I would say I tend to use most often Ancestry and Jstor. And then if it's an obituary request and we're having trouble finding it in the Alexandria Gazette, we'll opt for Washington Post historical newspaper database. So if you look at this page here, and we'll go back to the database page, and you come down, you can see, well, actually I should show you Ancestry is here at the top. And if you notice, it does say typically it's only available at a library branch. It has been expanded for work remotely, and that is a courtesy of the vendors that supply these databases. They have responded in that way to the pandemic, and it has definitely made things easier. A little worrying that people may expect it to continue once things return to normal. If it does, it will probably cost a significant amount to do so. But things may change. You never know. As you come down, you can see, I mean, there's a wide variety of databases here, most of which we don't touch on, but a great many things that may be of interest if you're not looking for history-specific material. You can see Fold 3 here, and this is basically a military history database. So if you're tracking someone you know to be a veteran of a war, this is the database you want to use. And so you can see here, it's got different countries, stay in the United States, and you can look at US Revolutionary War, War of 1812, on up through the Vietnam War. You can also see that it has groupings here for African American, Native American, and then non-military related. And it's a different interface than Ancestry, so be aware of that. But it is useful definitely for finding military veterans. In terms of other databases which are available here, here's your Jstor database. This is also one that has been expanded to remote access during the pandemic. If you click on this one, it might take it a minute. You have a basic search here, you have a browse. The thing to know about Jstor is it will have chapters occasionally of books. So if there's a specific book you need access to and we don't have it, or you would prefer to check it out and you can't check out local history materials, you can always check Jstor and see if they have chapters of the book available. A lot of academic books start out as articles or papers at the master's or PhD level. So it's not at all unusual for them to show up in this database. You just have to go chapter by chapter and search for them. So just know that, and that can be quite useful. In terms of other databases we use here, here's the US History Collection. Here is the Washington Post historical newspapers. And so when you look at this one, be aware that you can search by type. So if you come into the advanced search here, you can see, you can actually narrow in on, you know, whether you're looking at a historical newspaper or not. Document type, you can come in, and here is where we usually come in to say, okay, I'm looking specifically for an obituary. So that's how we use this one a lot. And then we'll put the person's name up here, approximate dates, since we do ask people to give us, you know, at least a decade if they can, of when they think the person died. And we'll search that way and see if we can find an obituary for an individual. Okay. Now, in terms of open access databases, you can go to this page here, and this is at the National Archives. And this is a list of all the basically digital sites, state digitization sites available around the US. And so these are treasure troves of information about what's going on in each state, migration patterns, all of that. So you can go through these and find out a great deal of information. Now for Virginia, our site is Virginia Memory. It's hosted at the Library of Virginia. If you click through to that, you can see the page which comes up, and you can actually look at the digital collections either by A to Z or by topic. And you also see here this link to Virginia newspapers. That's a link to the Virginia Chronicle website that I mentioned near the start of the presentation. So I tend to go in collections by topic for this one, because oftentimes what I'm looking for are the county and city research. And that has to do a lot with the Chancery Records Index. And so being able to search that and get an idea of, did somebody have a will? Did they die without a will? Is there a court case going back and forth amongst the heirs? A lot of times that's where this comes in handy to research for people, because there's a lot of court cases for key prominent people in this region of the country. So you can also see, there's cohabitation ledgers, public buildings and grounds. So there's a lot of material here that people don't necessarily realize is there, but can be very, very useful to any type of historic research you have going on. Okay. So in terms of archives and museums, anytime you are looking for history of Alexandria, Virginia, you're going to want to check the Library of Congress because of proximity and the fact that Alexandria was at one point in time part of the District of Columbia. In terms of the National Archives and Records Administration, you'll want to look there. We will help you as much as we can with that site, but just understand that government records are pretty dense. Like I said, we'll help where we can, but it can be an intimidating site. Being right here up close to DC, it might be the wisest course of action just to go and visit when you are able to do so and research that way if you need something in those records. Another area that people don't often think about checking out are the National Park Service records. And so the Park Service has a lot of museums and a lot of archival material that they put out there, but people just don't necessarily realize is out there for them to use. And hopefully this will, we'll see if this comes up in a minute. We might go ahead and bypass it for now and come back to it. And you can see down here at the bottom, I did also add Virginia Memory here. In terms of books and journals, rare materials, materials that are out of print, if you're interested in what the scientific community was saying in the 1800s, then Biodiversity Heritage Library is a good resource. This was basically a site that's been founded by botanical gardens around the world to collect scientific literature. And so that can be useful to understanding things. For example, like you're interested in the apothecary shop. What were they saying about herbs and medicines at certain time periods? You can come onto this site and actually find, what people were learning at certain times and what the scientific thought on matters were. Also the Hathi Trust. And I've heard that pronounced many different ways, Hathi, Hathi. I'm not gonna quibble over pronunciation on that one. But this is a site that is coming out of university libraries and other types of academic libraries where they are working with Google to scan books and get them up and online. So some of the books you'll find on Google Books. A lot of them you'll find on Hathi Trust. And one of the things to know about with this is if you go to collections here, we've actually put together a collection that represents a portion of the Alexandria Library Company materials that we hold. And so those materials were books that basically date from 1794 onward, when the subscription library, which was the predecessor of the current Alexandria Library, was founded. So if you come in, you'll want to say all collections. And I can tell you that this particular collection does contain more than 1,000 items, so you can use that filter there. And then you can also either scroll down until you find it here, Alexandria Library Company collection. Or if you didn't want to be bothered with doing the filters up here, you can do find a collection and put Alexandria Library Company collection in this box, and it should take you to it. So if you come into this collection, you can see here, these are examples of materials which are, if I can get it to answer me, materials which are in our rare book room. And in this instance, these are ones we know we have copies of. And we've done the bibliographic matching to make sure that even though these aren't scanned copies of what we personally hold, they are matching editions. And so you can come through and just see what people in Alexandria were reading at various time periods. Okay, let me close those. And in terms of newspapers, as before, Chronicling America, Virginia Chronicle. If we take a really quick look at Chronicling America, and let me check this site. Nope, still not coming up. Okay. So Chronicling America, one of the things people don't often realize that they can check, they do have all digitized newspapers that they have online listed here. But if you're looking for a specific area and you don't know what the titles might be, you can come to this U.S. Newspaper Directory 1690 to present. And you can say, I'm interested in Virginia newspapers. I'm interested in the ones for Alexandria. And I'm interested specifically in the city of Alexandria. And if you leave it at a very broad time frame, it's going to pull more. But if you know you're only interested in a specific time frame, say we wanted to look at 1860 to 1900. You then hit search, and these are the materials, the newspapers that have a geographic focus for Alexandria during that time period. Now, not all of these are digitized. In fact, when I went through earlier, the ones that are red, we actually don't hold microfilm for. Some of the microfilm is held out in the Midwest, in Nebraska and Kansas and places like that, because these particular newspapers had to do with discussions about silver and money and such like that. So a bit more of an issue or a hot topic during that time period out there. Or at least people are researching them more out there. And so the materials are held there, and we don't have copies. So it's something where if you knew you wanted to see that, you could click on this record. You can see, here's the subjects. And then you can come in and say libraries that have it. This tells you, in this instance, this one's held at the University of California. Some of the others, let's see. Nebraska here, there was another one that was Kansas. So it gives you an idea of where you can find these newspapers at. Okay. Ebooks, be aware of our ebooks. I am running out of time here, but you can search our Gale Virtual Reference Library and EBSCO books for more historically oriented books. Find It Virginia, Overdrive, and Libby do have some. And those are located on our website. If you come to Books and More, and then under the digital collection heading, ebooks here, and you can drop into any of these websites listed on the right-hand side for each grouping to see what materials they have that may be relevant to your research needs. Okay. And I think that is everything I had. So if there's any other questions, you can put them in the chat or email us at lhsc@alexlibraryba.org. And we do answer reference questions there if you need assistance. Okay, I am going to end the recording.